I want to quickly talk about function or method parameters. Here's an example of a function I have called add. The function, what it does is it returns an integer. The name of the function is add. It returns an integer and it's publicly available. Inside of that add function, it's declaring two integers. One called first name or first number, and that it's setting it to 1, automatically setting it to 1. The second integer is set to 2. The third integer called sum is just going to be set to whatever the first number and the second number is. You can assume that sum is going to be 3 because we're adding 1 and 2, and our function is then returning the value of sum, which will always be 3 because we're specifying 1 for the first number and 2 for the second number. We're adding those two numbers together to get the sum. I also have a unit test for this function, and this video isn't meant to cover unit tests necessarily, but it's the way that it's the code that we'll use to run our function. I declare inside this add test function, I declare a new instance of our addition class. That's the class that we have over here, public class addition. So I instantiate a new addition class, and then from that addition class, I'm going to call the add method. That's the one that's adding 1 and 2 together and returning 3. So when add returns a value, it's going to store it in the variable in the integer sum, and then our test is just going to say ensure that sum is equal to 3. And it should always be the case for the way the code is written right now, because it's going to add 1 and 2. Sum will always be 3 in this case. We haven't yet talked about the parameters, but I just wanted to establish a function without any parameters. Function parameters or method parameters go inside the open and close parentheses that is immediately following the name of the function. In this case, there are no methods, or I'm sorry, there are no parameters sent into this function. This open and close parentheses has nothing inside of it. So this function is not requiring anybody that uses this function to send any values into that function. So when I run the addition, I'm going to run this unit test. I'm going to set a breakpoint on it, and I'm just going to debug through this unit test. And I'm going to step over the instantiation of our addition class. Now we have an object that is our addition class, an instance of our addition class. Then I'm going to call the add method and see what sum gets returned. Right now sum is 0, but the minute I execute it by stepping over that line, it had set sum to 3. So it had ran the add method. The add method got ran, and it returned the value of 3. And now our assertion for our unit test is that sum is equal to the number 3, and I'll go ahead and continue. And I can see that the unit test has passed. It did assume that 3 was equal to 3 and that was true, and the unit test passed. Now you might ask yourself, well, what if I want to add different numbers other than just 1 and 2? And that's where method parameters are a good thing to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for our add function, I'm going to declare that we're going to send in a couple parameters to our method. The first one's going to be an integer, and we're going to call that first number as well. And the second, notice I separated it with a comma. So our add function right now has one parameter that's going to be sent into it called first number. And I'm going to send in another one called second number. So when somebody calls our add method, they're going to be forced to send in two numbers, two integers, before they can call our function. And I'm going to get rid of these. What you'll notice is that our code can then say whatever numbers that you sent in as parameters, these are parameters, there's one parameter, there's a second parameter, they're separated by that comma. Whatever parameter values you sent in, I'm going to add those two things together. I'm going to return, I'm going to store that value, that summary, that sum of these two additions, into the sum variable, this integer, and return that integer, the value of it. So if somebody were to send in 5 and 6, it would add 5 and 6 together and get it, the sum would then be 11, and it would return, our function would return 11. Back over on our unit tests, notice how add now has this red squiggly underneath it, and it said, hey, you were supposed to provide some arguments or parameters to your function. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to send in 5 and 6, just like we talked about. We know that it's going to add 5 and 6 together. It's going to send 11. And what's going to happen is our assertion for our unit test is going to say, is 11 equal to 3? Well, no, it's not, and we would expect our unit test to fail. So I'm going to go ahead and debug this unit test. And I'm going to step over. This time I'm going to step into our addition method. I'm going to do F11. I'm going to watch as what it does. It says, okay, I know what first number is. You sent it in. Somebody sent in 5 as the first number. Well, that's what our unit test did. It sent in 5 as the first number. The second number, it sent in a 6. And I'm going to go back to the unit test and look. Yep, 5, comma, 6. So it sent in 5 and 6. 5 for the first number, 6 for the second number. It added those two things together, and it hasn't yet done that. Sum is 0, but I'm going to go ahead and step over. Look at the value of sum, and it's 11. So it's going to return that value, 11, back to the caller, whoever called this function. And now sum in our unit test is 11. And now we're going to try to see, is 11 equal to 3? Well, no, it's not. I'm going to go ahead and click continue. And Visual Studio is nice, come up and says, your assertion failed. Well, we know why it failed, right? Because 11 is not equal to 3. And if I click continue, I'll notice my unit test failed. I got this little red X. And I think over here in Test Explorer, I got the red X as well. Those two things failed. Now if I rewrote my unit test to make sure that it equaled 11, I would assume this unit test would then pass. The purpose of this video wasn't to show you how unit tests works or how what functions look like, but that this function has two parameters now being sent into it. This function or this method now has two parameters inside of the open and closed parenthesis. Here's the open parenthesis. Here's the closed parenthesis. And instead of being blank like it was before, it now has two parameters being sent in. And we can utilize those two parameters inside of our function. Notice I'm not declaring them up here inside of our function. I'm declaring them right inside of the open and closed parentheses. I'm saying these are integers, and somebody when they call the addition function or the add function, they have to send in a number and a second number to this function. Our unit test does it, right? We are forced to put in 5 and 6. If our unit test was written where it didn't pass anything in, and I went to compile this, it would give us a compilation error or a build error saying, you can't build this. This isn't good code. You were supposed to send in two parameters and you didn't. So this is syntactically correct because now I'm adding what it expects, 2 number parameters to be passed into that function. These are called parameters. Another term that people commonly use is arguments. These, a lot of times people will use, this is an argument to your method, and this is an argument to your method. It's the first and second. In that context, and that's just that specific case, parameters and arguments are interchangeable terms, and they mean the same thing. I hope that helps you understand what method or what function arguments are, and then how you can use them inside of your function.